connecting. Okay, so hopefully it's not good. Alright, hello everyone. So today I'm going to give you a lesson about openings and this value on 5D chess. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to go over some of the basic openings. We're not really going to go that much in depth inside the openings, but we're going to mostly see what has been played, what are the advantages of playing something on a playstyle aspect, and what are the disadvantages of playing on that aspect, for example. So to do so, it is I think that everyone here knows about the F7. So what it is important to know is that during the F7 sack, because of the F7 sack, we have to set up many times defenses. And the thing is that openings are going to approach the opening with two different philosophies. One is you don't allow the F7 sack because you're gonna say, hey, if I allow the F7 sack, I'm probably just going to lose. And on the other aspect is, hey, I'm going to allow the F7 sack, but if they try to F7 sack me, I'm going to tempt trouble. I think that most of the openings over here tend to be playing on the aspect of don't allow the F7 sack at all. Because if you allow the F7 sack, you're going to have many times issues that you're simply not going to be able to control properly. So because of that, we have the most basic opening is preventing the F7 sack or the F2 sack by making sure it cannot happen at all. So the way we do it is we just go over the knight f3, knight f6, and this is basically the start of most of the openings in 5D chess, just because knight f3 is a super stable move. From here, what is going to happen is many times the most standard thing to happen is d4, d5, c3, c6. The idea with this is that you're playing in a way that allows you to say, hey, I'm going to make sure that you're not able to come over here to give me a check over here. I'm going to make sure that there's no trials to the F2 or the F7 sack. The knight is able to defend, and since you have the pawn here, your pawn structure can become a little bit solid in the future, and your knight is able to move eventually with this setup. And this is really common just because it's one of the easiest ways to play. It's one of the most practical ways to play. But the disadvantage that I will say is that playing these positions can be pretty complicated. They are so well studied that they are many times able to go to endgames. And yeah, from here, like for example, like bishop f4 is really common, bishop g5 is pretty common too, and it depends a lot on what type of opening you want to go for. Like for example, if you want to go for something more stable, many times you go for something like this, just because this allows you to make sure that you are getting a stable position. Like for example, bishop f4, bishop f5, bishop here, and I messed up the move order there, but basically what happens is you end up in a position where many times, if you play like for example completely symmetric, something that happens is players will end up trading pieces and entering into positions where you have no bishops and the knights are here. So, for example, this is a position that has been played several times, and it's a position that is difficult to play. But for example, this is like the reason I was saying, like, it is pretty straightforward what the plans are. But many times, if you go into variations where you trade a lot of pieces, the positions can get pretty complex. I think I'm probably going to leave this line a little bit behind, just because I think that it's also going to be good to let your coaches have a little bit more freedom on how to explain this type of positions. But for example, something that is also pretty common with this type of lines is that because of this, many players don't want to trade the bishops, because they know that if they trade bishops, they can get in situations where it can become pretty difficult sometimes just to understand where it goes. The bishop's getting traded. Okay, so the bishop's getting traded off. Answering the question, it's a line that basically what it allows is you go into an endgame and you say, hey, I'm going into an endgame. Because of that, what many players have been doing to avoid trying to play anything related to the bishopless endgame is making sure to play something where you can actually save your bishop. So for example, some players will try to play bishop g5 directly, because with these lines, for example, it is easier to not trade pieces completely. So when you play like bishop g5, you're expecting things like, oh, there's going to be an h6, there's going to be a g5, I'm going to move my bishop is going to be saved, trades are going to be more scarce, and you can play a more unbalanced position. But as long as the bishops are on the game, as long as there's a bishop on the game, the position tends to be pretty open for the most part. And that's something that is really important to understand, is that when you're playing d4 C3 structures, I think that knowing if you want to keep the bishops or not on the game is an important thing to consider. Having the bishops on the board means you're playing for more active positions, more unbalanced position. And whenever you're playing for bishop trades, you're playing for more grindy positions, endgame-ish positions. The queens are not able to move that easily. Knights are going to be able to enter the position. And yeah, it's just going to be that type of mess over there. Another thing that happens is, for example, if you're playing with black pieces, is if you're playing f4, if white is playing f4, black sometimes just plays the g5, bishop g4, because they are like, hey, I'm not going to trade you, I'm not going to trade my bishop over here. And that's how it's going to happen many times. Many times players just tend to avoid a little bit to trade bishops just because of what I was talking. If you trade a bishop, then the game becomes pretty much a grindish endgame. Are there any questions over here? I guess not. Alright, so this is basically the most common opening over here. Now I'm going to teach you just a little bit of what happens with g5. That's the general plan. So many times what happens with bishop g5, for example, is that you're playing positions where you are trying to bait h6, so that you move the bishop, they play g5, you move the bishop, and eventually this can become weak and you're able to attack it. But if they don't attack that bishop, you're always able to eventually play to capture on this knight. And this knight is a really important piece for many. First of all, it makes sure that the queen is unable to get to h5, which is a pretty dangerous spot over here. It also allows your bishop to be able to move over here and protect while in case of an emergency, and being able to protect any time travels from bishops over here towards f7. Notice this thing, f7 is just a pretty strong place to attack in general, just because exposing the king can be something that is pretty difficult to do. So yeah. So for example, so I'm just going to play it a little bit just so that you are able to see what I mean with this. Like, just if you're trying to bait this move, so that you're able to play something a little bit more that has a little bit more of imbalances. Like for example, going over here, you can just trade that bishop and then play immediately h4. And the idea is that if you play h4, you're able to capture here the pawn. You're able to attack the file over here. And yeah, it's just there's definitely ways to be able to play over here. The game becomes a little bit more active eventually. You can save pieces over here by saying, like for example, trade, and if the bishop comes here, you can either trade the bishop, or you can always just say, hey, I'm going to actually save my knight because this f2 is defended, so I know that there's not going to be threats eventually over there. So that's the way you play the bishop g5. It's basically just trying to bait h6, g5. It's going to happen at some point or another, just because that bishop can be pretty annoying. If it doesn't happen, players are going to be doing it to defend the knights, for example. Alright, so that's so this is basically knight f3, with knight f3, knight f6, d4, d5. There are other ways to play with that. For example, there's this line that has become a little bit more popular lately. That is, instead of playing c3, players might play bishop d2. And the idea is that with bishop d2, you're protecting any threats that goes over this file, over this diagonal to the king. So the queen is not able to checkmate over here. Bishop is not able to check. You're protecting against threats from here. Well, not from here. Well, you're protecting basically threats over here, but at the same time, you allow yourself to play c4, and basically the idea is you don't want to play a passive position, you want to play a more active position. So this is something I would recommend if you like playing things that are more active, that are more open in the position, or if you simply want to experience more piece activity. And this is definitely a way to go for it. It's becoming more popular lately. Yeah, and the only thing is that if you play bishop d2 first, you cannot play. After you play bishop d2, you should not play things like c3 or knight f3, or you're simply going to get mated like this. So you have to wait. You cannot play moves like this, at least immediately. Once you play the the bishop plays something else, you can play something on c3. But I say that that's an important thing to know, is that if you see, is that this is a pretty common trick that can happen many times when you play this type of openings. Many people blunders. I blundered that a couple of times. Even Dreamer has blundered this type of things in the past. So it's not an uncommon thing. It's just something that people sometimes might forget. And yeah, this is basically where this goes for. The next thing I want to go into. Are there any questions so far? Yeah, it's basically you want to attack. You want to defend the diagonal to the king many times, because many times you want to attack you want to protect the diagonals to the king in this opening, because the way it plays is you're going to play for a passive position. You're going to be more patient, and you don't want any threats immediately towards the king. So yeah, so let me show you what I mean. So I'll just show you what happens if we go into a similar position than before. Like, for example, I'm just doing a winning move now. It doesn't matter. So same idea. Same idea but different timing. So basically what happens is, if you play like knight c3 and here, now this is not checkmate, and the reason is because now the bishop is going to be able to defend any threats from the future. Exactly. So queen a5 is only going to be made if they block it immediately. So if they block it immediately after playing bishop d2, it's basically because now let me just do a random move so that you're able to see. So the queen is able to move here. While it's true that now it's still able to move through the knight, now the bishop is going to be blocking, so there's no check anymore. And that's the reason why you can wait as long as you make a move. As long as you don't play knight c3 immediately or c3, you can be fine. But this is just to show you something that can happen. But yeah. Alright. Next thing. Okay, so I'll go over it. So they're asking over here, why will it be made if you play immediately? So let's say you play c3 over here, for example, or knight, it doesn't matter. The reason this is made is because now the queen is able to cross here. The knight is not here anymore yet, so the queen is able to still travel over here. But the key difference here is that you're able to cross over here because the bishop hasn't moved yet to d2, and because of that the queen is able to get to the king. So that's the reason why you cannot play it immediately after playing bishop d2 something on c3. So you have to play. So that's the reason you have to wait always. Yeah, that's true. Knight c3 is always played after c4, but I'm just saying, like, this is just a common mistake that I've seen many times. It's just counterintuitive. It is counterintuitive at first, but it makes sense once you see the movement of the queen. There's just a gap where the piece is able to play. Exactly. So you can always play knight f3, d4, c3 immediately. Or if you want to go for the bishop d2, like for example, let's go d4, d5, c3, c6. And now after, I don't know, just random move, this is not going to be checkmate because now this pawn is actually on the way of the queen. So that's the way. That's the reason it is. If you play knight f3, d4, and c3, you don't have to worry about any of this. However, if you play with after d4, you play bishop d2. That's when you can have issues over there. All right. Next thing, are there any more questions, or if not, I'm going to go with the next opening that I think it's pretty common. If not, I guess I'm going with the next one. So the next opening that we're going to cover here is going to be the English. The English is an opening that is interesting in the aspect that you're playing a position where the pieces are going to be more like you're trying to enter a position where all your pieces are going to have something to do. They tend to be pretty active positions. They tend to be pretty dynamic positions in general. And if you like dynamic positions, this is an opening that you can definitely try for. And it is knight f3, knight f6. Most of the openings are going to start like this, and the line goes c4. Now, at the first glance, there's no you're not defending the f7 sack the same way. So let's see what is the reasoning behind this opening. So the reasoning is there's not going to be an f7 sack over here because you're always able to play the queen faster and capture the queen if needed. So, for example, if they want to go for the f7 sack, you go with the bishop with the queen over here, queen b6, queen trades, and now there's no f7 sack. So the way you defend now on this opening the against the f7 sack is by saying, hey, I'm quicker to defend the spot where you're going to be. If I move there, I'm going to capture you. If you move there, I'm going to capture you, and we're going to enter into this position. This position is still a pretty good. Alright, see ya. This position is pretty good. This is a pretty good position for black too. It is also a good position for. It's a good position also for white. But this is, if you go for these lines specifically, it can get pretty complex. The knight enters here. There are lines where at some point, or there are lines where you play the pawn either to d4 or d3 and make sure to defend over here. And yeah, these lines, this is the reason why it is defended against the f7 sack. But black is good. So in this case, if you enter into this type of positions, what happens is white is playing for the structure and black is playing for their dynamics. And at that point is whoever is able to, if black is able to prove dynamics, that they have better dynamics, this means more piece activity, the bishop, the knights are able to move easier, the bishops are able to get out faster and things like that, black is going to win. If white, on the other hand, is able to stabilize the position and say, hey, I have the better structure, I have the better, therefore I have a better position, white is many times able to stabilize the position and have an advantage. And there are even some situations in which the position can become so stable from the on the queen side that the king might even end up on c2, and it's just completely fine for the king to be there, which is crazy to think about. But it's just because of the sheer amount of pawns that are on the queen side. So that's what happens if you go for the trade. I think that that's something. It's a pretty complex line. I cannot go over all of it over here because it's a pretty in-depth line. So I recommend you to check it out with your coaches too. if you have any questions about that those sort of lines. The other way it can be played is by playing the symmetrical position. So in this way, neither player is going for the f7 sack, and basically with this, what you're saying is you're not going to go for the f7 sack at all, because you're saying, hey, I know that you know how to defend against the f7 sack, and I know what. So I'm going to just play something similar, and neither of us are going to play for the f7 sack. When you go for this type of positions, basically, it is going to be, your plan is basically going to be something like playing your knight here at some point, playing either e3 or g3. If you play g3, many times it's so that you're able to castle over here. This is to prevent Tchaikovsky. Any Tchaikovskys over here. So for example, bishop g3 is going to be to play g2 over here. Playing with the knight over, just castling and just destroy the center. On the other hand, white is going to, on the other hand, you have the plan with e3, which is basically playing a more stable position where you're going to bring the bishop here on d3, the queen is going to go to c2, and eventually you're going to pressure over here, and you can still add more pressure by bringing, by playing something like b3, bishop goes here, and then I'll just show you more in depth what I'm saying, like just with an example. It's completely symmetrical, just to show you, just because I don't want to go over this. And eventually, a way to play this is just play the bishop here, and the idea is to have a lot of pressure on these diagonals, and this is basically a way to play this. So yeah, either you want to destroy the center or you want to play for the diagonals. This is the advantage that this opening has, at least when it's symmetrical, is you have a lot of options when it's symmetrical. But yeah, when it's when the f7 sack happens, like I just showed you before, positions tend to be more precise and pretty sharp. And these are basically the main ways to play against with all these C3 lines, for example. And yeah, it's just something that I think that is important to consider. And yeah, it's just so it's important to consider this type of positions as active. Do you have any questions over it? All right. So it seems like Nikita made a point that is important to mention, is that another way to play the English is, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to trade the queens, you can play you can decide to defend by playing e3 here and say, hey, you're going to have the f7 sack, but I'm going to bring my queen and either here or here, and I'm just going to play a position where even if you are able to f7 sack me, I'm able to set up what is called a parallel queen defense. So I'm going to go over it really quick, just in case that you don't know what it is or you forgot what it is. So basically, once the f7 sack crosses, let's just go over here, this line, check, doesn't matter. Right over here in this turn, when they're planning to bring the queen out, that's when you bring out the you bring this queen, you bring it to this board, and now there's no checkmate, because if they try this checkmate, then it is completely defended. And that's the reason this doesn't work. This is definitely a way to play too, if you want to play a little bit more stable type of position. All right. Next thing on the list is, now we're going into the lines that tend to be more sharp in the position. So previously I mentioned about knight f3. This is definitely the most common way to play 5 chess. It is the most stable in many aspects, but it's definitely not the only way to play. When you get at higher levels of 5 chess, you might see many people playing e3 immediately. And e3 is an interesting way to play 5 chess, because it says two things that are important to know. First of all, anything that happens, like you're basically saying, I'm defending from the beginning from any queen troubles on this diagonal. There might still be over here, and that's still something that is important to know, but it's not necessarily what but these are going to be defended. The reason I personally it's not my play style to play e3, so I'm not that much of an expert on e3 lines. But what I can tell you is that e3 lines are meant to work with the idea that if you f7 sack your opponent, if you are getting f7 sack, many times you have a counter trouble. So it's a different philosophy. Knight f3 openings tends to be like, hey, if you so it's basically saying, hey, if you have like knight f3, if you have knight f3, it's basically saying, I'm going to have a more stable position. I'm going to play a position where I'm going to avoid completely the f7 sack by not allowing you to enter into the f7 sack. On the other hand, the philosophy of e3 is, hey, you want to f7 sack me? Fine, I have a counter to your f7 sack. And this is basically the main difference between e3 and knight f3. And I think it's a pretty interesting way to think about it. It's just like a completely different philosophy of playing chess in general. 5 chess, sorry. It's a completely different philosophy. So let's just go for some lines. So here is where the important things are. So black will only have knight f6 as their first move. White has more options as their first move, but the thing is, black is kind of forced always to go for knight f6 because of the time troubles. For example, e6 used to be played in the past, but it has been proved that if not winning for white, it's definitely a huge advantage for white. I think that there was even at some point a proof that they showed that this is basically winning for white, and it was a proof that required a 4 timeline line, and it was 20 moves deep. So yeah, it's definitely not worth to go for e6 in general. So because of this, knight f6 is definitely the way to go in 5 chess. From here, there are three options you can go for, depending on your playstyle. Option number one, this is the most classical way to play E3 structures, is saying, hey, I'm going to play this in a structure that is going to be more passive, but I'm going to eventually have more flexibility. I can eventually play like P3. I don't commit to any punch structure yet. And oh, give me a second. Okay. Yeah, this is just a quick overview on everything. Uh, yeah, I'm just going over. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is just fast. It's just I'm trying to show a lot of playsets that are possible, and I think after this I'm just going to show. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I thought it was my audio for a moment, and I got scared. Yeah, this. Yeah, 5 chess openings can be hard to grasp, but once you get it, once you get an idea of certain ideas, it's just basically many times like the same lines, but in more depth. It's basically what happens. You play only 2-3 different openings, but it's like you eventually play those 2-3 different openings really well, and I think that's something I like about it. But yeah. Anyways, what I was saying is, knight f3, basically saying I'm going to try to play a position where I'm going to, I don't know if I'm going to play c4, if I'm going to play b3, b4, if I'm going to play the bishop here, if I want to place the knight over here, and if there's any time travels ideas, eventually there's going to be eventually white is going to try to play for a line here where they're able to set up a time travel counter travel. Yeah. All right. So yeah, that's basically knight f3. Queen f3, on the other hand, is a more stable position. This is basically saying, hey, I might probably want to commit a little bit more my queen. I want to already have this defended just in case. I'm able to, if you try to build this, I have then threats. I create some threats eventually on f7, and it's not going to be as easy for you to get me an f7 sack. And the third approach is the magic wall. This is something that has been played more recently. It is something that I personally don't like playing because if you like to play, it requires a lot of timelines, but it allows for really aggressive positions. Many timelines if you like playing with many timelines. And many times there's even some cheesy lines where you can bring the bishop here, capture this knight, bring the queen, like bringing pressure. Like I'm just going to play some random moves, like say like attacking here immediately, capturing, bringing the queen here, and then there are mating threats. There are many times mating threats on the f7 sack, on the f7, on the f7. I don't know, like something like this. The idea is many times you go back in time, forcing the king to capture, and then after that, bishop captures the knight. Something happens, and now that you have this, now you go for the queen. And this is basically one of the main ideas. It's not of this opening, but it shows how tricky this type of lines are. So this tends to be more of tricky lines. Of course, there are ways to play against it that are more stable, but it depends. I will say that it depends a lot on how you want to approach this type of positions. So what I will say is basically, in summary, so in summary, what I think it's going to be the best way to show is knight f3 is the most stable way to play. You're going to have openings like d4, c4, and just play some 5d chess. Just play either a stable position that has been played many times, a more active and dynamic position, or if you want to play short lines that many times can get into multi-timeline situations, then you play 3. And with all of this, it's basically you basically get a good summary of what the openings are going to be out there. Now, the next thing I want to cover a little bit is just going to be an overview on piece material, and for that I want to see just something really quick. Let me see if I can just, there we go. So I'm going to change strip over here. See if I can change. Oh, this is going to be this one. So the way I'm going to go is I'm going to basically just clean the board and basically say I'm going to show now piece values using liches over here, just because that's an easy way for me to edit things. But the way I'm going to go is I'm going to show you what I think, how I think pieces are more or less classified. So something like this is probably like the way I will say. Like I will say that it's something like pawns. So the way we want to think is that pawns tend to be just walls. So they tend to be the lower end on the lower end of pieces. So it's basically something more. I guess it's more of something. They're just able to. They're just there as walls protecting the king. They are not really good offensive pieces for the most part, but they're able to make sure that your king is really defended. And many times, if you're able to capture a pawn that is besides the king, that's sometimes good enough to be able to capture and get the win over there. Rooks are the next piece. So this is counterintuitive, but rooks are actually not as strong as knights and bishops. I know this is true in normal chess, but this is not true in 5D chess, and the reason is because rooks are not as valuable in the aspect that they're not pretty flexible. If they attempt travel, they can just block themselves. So let me just do a pretty quick example of what I mean. So, like for example, if I move the rook here, the rook is able to time travel this turn if they want to. But the thing is, if you don't use that time travel immediately, what happens is now the rook is actually going to block itself. It doesn't matter where I play, just run the move. The rook now, it actually blocks itself because the rook it was previously there, and therefore the time travel is not there anymore. Oh, sorry, I'm just. Oops, sorry. Give me a second. Let me see if. Give me a second. Let me see if I can just better share my screens. Okay, let's see this. Let me see if I can. What happens if I do this? There we go. Okay. So let me just show you. Okay. So I'll just put it over here. Okay, so I'll just bring back what I was saying. Basically, let's just show. I'll just show you really quick. So, like something. So normally, let's just play one more. So, if you play the rook here, for example, the rook is going to be able to. The rook is going to be able to time travel over here, right? But the thing is, you have to use that. You have to use that travel immediately. Otherwise, what happens is that travel is going to be blocked completely because the rook is actually blocking itself. That's where I wanted to go for. All right. So yeah, that's the reason. That's part of the reason why. That's part of the reason why I think that many players value rooks lower than bishops and rooks, bishops and knights. Then knights and bishops go pretty much together, but I will say that there are some things that you have to consider with that. And queens are basically are over everything. Yeah, no, it is. I should be able. You should be able to see. Also see. Yeah, you can see both of them. Okay. No, you're. Yeah, I just checked. You should be able to see both screens whenever. I think it's. Yeah. Okay. But yeah. So the way you have to think about 5e chess material is that it's not black and white. It's not like in normal chess that you could say like this pawn is 1 point, this is 5 points, this is 3 points, this is 3 points, this is 9 points. It's not the same way. It's not. You cannot think on 5e chess material in the same way. You have to think about it more as it's a broader thing to consider. It's like sometimes a rook might be able to have the worth of a knight, for example, or a bishop, or eventually the knight is going to go down. But okay, so the question here is, why does this happen on 5e chess? Why does pieces are not really that tangible? Well, that's basically because in 5e chess all the pieces are basically pretty strong, and the way you can think about it is that yes, a single piece can basically win the game. It's as simple as that. A single piece can mate a king. A single piece can destroy. It can make or do. It can basically change the result of the game. In normal chess, you usually require 2 pieces on its own. So yeah, it's basically just a way of thinking. The thing is that because of 5e chess, the pieces are more strong on their own. Many times pieces are not even able to show their full potential. So for example, rooks can be pretty strong on endgames because they're able to time travel a long time, really far away in the past. But they're not going to have. But the thing is, in 5D chess you don't get to endgames pretty often. So you're never really going to see that power of a rook necessarily. Knights, for example, are pieces that are pretty agile. They're able to squish into the position. Pretty simple. They're able to squish into the position. They're able to attack over here, attack here. They're able to poke the king in three different. They're able to poke the king in three different. Let me just show you the situation. I'll just. Like, they're able to poke a king in three different ways. Here, here, here. So knights can become really good, but the thing is, once you have less pieces, knights are not going to be able to travel far away, for example. Knights are limited to 2 spaces. And many times, if you have an emergency, you want to time travel as far as possible because you don't want to have anything to deal with that at all. So yeah, knights are basically a way in which are definitely pieces that you want to that become stronger that are strong because in the beginning they have more use. They are able to jump over. They're able to, in general terms, they're going to be able to enter into the close positions that 5D chess tends to have. Now, let's just delete these pieces again. Now, bishops are interesting because I mentioned right now 5D chess tends to be good for knights because they are close positions. So if you think about it, usually that will mean that bishops are not going to be as strong as a knight, are not going to be as strong as knights necessarily, because if the positions are close, knights are going to be better. That will be true in normal chess if we were playing more close positions, but there's something that we have to consider about bishops. Bishops are able to attack like this, right? You know, they're able to attack like this, or if we have a bishop over here, they're able to attack. They're able to basically control an open file, an open row, a background. They can become pretty strong pieces. And that ability gives them pretty much an ability of flexibility that controls how the structure is played. So for example, I'm going to go into the initial position. So for example, let's just have some moves over here, and let's just say that eventually a player wants to go, somehow we ended up in this position. So let's just say there are no queens too for some reason, just to simplify our purposes. When there are bishops in the game, things like this should not be played. Why? Simply because you're going to have a lot of control over this diagonal. And that control is just too powerful many times. This makes it so that I think that you might probably have learned this on previous 5D Pogchamps lessons, but the idea is that a bishop is able to control the pawn structure. Now let's just say that we don't have bishops anymore, and at some point you have this situation. Now this is something that can happen, right? Because now there's no bishops or queens that are able to threaten the king, and because there's no pieces that can threaten the king, on this open diagonal, on this open file, the time diagonal towards the king, so basically this column over here, is not going to be as strong anymore. Sure, rooks are able to give it checks if they are somehow able to enter there, but they're not going to have the same power than a bishop attacking like this. Eventually this is going to be checkmate, and it forces as long as there are bishops or queens on the game, it forces a player to play on certain way. So for example, as long as there are bishops, I cannot open my files. Once there are no longer bishops or queens, the king can actually just be completely fine. The king can actually be completely fine having their pawns having an open file directly for any piece to capture over there. And yeah, that's part of the reason why this this is something that can actually happen over here, and it's something that has to be considered. Just because what I like to say is that you have to think fighting chess material is something fluid, something that you have to feel it. It's not something tangent, and it's something that you learn the more experience you get. For example, if we are in this position, in a position like this one, like eventually, even though we have in theory the same amount of material, I will say that white is winning in general, even just because they're able to enter here, like playing like this idea. And just having ideas like this makes it really strong for a player to say, hey, I'm able to threaten things. Or even at this, say, let's say going over here. Just the fact that you're able to do things like this shows how strong it is to be able to bring pieces. It's able to have the power of the bishops, just because attacking a column is good. So what I like to say is, in general terms, when you compare bishops and knights, and you want to see if you want to trade or not, what I like to say is, if you trade knights, if you trade your pieces, you want to think about how much control each thing keeps. Many times you don't want to trade a knight for a bishop necessarily, because if your opponent is going to have the only bishop in the game, they're going to have control on the structure. But if you are able to win a trade like that, then you're able to win the trade. You're able to win that control on the file, and that's the way I like to think about it. And yeah, and in respect of how many pieces is worth a queen, I don't know. I think people have said like 3 or 4 pieces is more or less the same as a queen in 5e chess, but there has never been a situation to prove it. Usually players tend to trade the queens, or they just somehow avoid bringing the queens at all. It's not that important for them. Finally, the one thing that I want to say is how piece value changes over time. Mainly rooks, bishops, and knights. So I'm just going to place them over here, and I think this is going to be the last thing. Rooks are going to be the strongest piece in the endgames. It's one of the strongest pieces on the endgames, and it's going to be basically equivalent to all of these pieces, but it's going to be hard to develop it. The reason they're not good pieces in 5e chess, at least not as good as bishops and knights, is because rooks are basically pieces that tend to be pretty slow, and they require a lot of ports in order to be able to have their full potential. When there's a lot of ports and they have the longest time travels, yeah, this is one of the better options for emergency. It is actually the best option for an emergency. You travel as far as possible, and then you play back and try to see if you can win that position with a little bit more material, but less, but losing your time to travel advantage. So yeah, rooks gain value over time. Bishops are probably the most stable piece on 5D chess in terms of value. Bishops are going to keep their value just because they're consistent. They're going to improve over time, because what happens is with time, bishops are going to be able to move more, and they're going to improve more. But the issue is that they're always limited to a time travel that is 7 spaces long, which is good, which can be good, or it can become an issue eventually if you have an emergency. Lastly, knights is a piece that over time its value decreases, and the reason is that on endgames, while it's true that it is a pretty flexible piece, it is also a piece that the issue is that it's just able to move 2 spaces. And as I mentioned, there are many times situations where you want your rook to be able to time travel as far as possible, a piece to be able to time travel as far as possible, because you're simply losing if you don't go for it, if you don't go for that last Hail Mary. And knights are not able to do that. Knights, what they do have in the endgames though, is they can they can poke into the position. Knights are going to get value on the endgame if they're close enough to the king. If they manage to get close enough to the king, that's exactly when you're going to when you're going to have the chance to basically go for a winning situation. But that's basically that's for the most part. Give me a second. Work to basics. Okay. So yeah. So that's basically coming back. So that's basically it. I don't know if there are any other questions with the piece value, piece material, or if this was completely clear how to evaluate pieces in 5D chess. Remember, it's mostly you approximate and you have to feel the vibe. It's kind of how it works in 5D chess. It's never something tangent that you can feel. It's mostly like, oh, I have 2 rooks. You have 2 rooks. I have a bishop, but you have a knight. And then you start trading and checking, and that's basically how you check out material. So yeah. If there are not any more questions, I think I'm going to end up the lesson over here. And thank you everyone who showed up. Sorry for the technical difficulties for the ones who were here. And I'll upload this later today. So yeah, looking forward to see all the participants here, and yeah, goodbye.